Slither your way to success while scaling historic heights. We're taking a quick peek at Snake Pass. Snake Pass is a 3D puzzle game developed by Sumo Digital. It's reminiscent of titles from the N64 and PlayStation era, but created with modern technology. Sumo's built a bit of a reputation for themselves, having worked on both large and small titles over the years. Their backlog includes projects such as Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, Little Big Planet 3, the 5th episode of the 2016 version of Hitman, and their magnum opus, Xbox Fitness.
Xbox Fitness knows how you move.
While the company has a lot of experience, they've always worked with a publisher, be it someone like Sega or even the BBC. Snake Pass is the first time Sumo has done a project completely on their own, it seems, both developing and publishing, and they've taken all of their previous experience and crammed it into one package. The game originated during an in-house game jam, a quick competition where the studio was broken up into teams to create prototypes for future potential projects. Sebastian Leese, who was originally brought on to work on Little Big Planet 3, developed the idea after messing around with rope physics in the Unreal 4 engine and seeing how they could interact with the level's geometry. The concept of controlling a rope-like being, such as a snake, proved itself time and again to the studio, to the point that they decided to throw everything they had at it. Sumo created a 3-part miniseries on their YouTube channel, going over the backstory of the game's development, and I really wish more developers would do this kind of thing. I love watching behind-the-scenes stuff, but it can be hard to find, let alone with all that much detail. In Snake Pass, you play as a snake, who controls like a snake because he's a snake. His name is Noodle, and he seems to be a rather happy-go-lucky kind of guy, considering he lives on some kind of archipelago of crumbling jungle ruins flying way above the earth. I think he's supposed to be a coral snake, but it's difficult to tell since he lacks fangs, so there's no way to know if he's poisonous or not. How he came to the floating ruins? Who knows? Maybe he's related to Quetzalcoatl, but it's up to him and his hummingbird sidekick Doodle to save the place by repairing magical teleporters that connect the islands together. Why this task falls to a limbless snake instead of a flying animal such as your hummingbird sidekick is beyond me, since his lack of limbs makes navigation rather complex. When I said Noodle controls like a snake, I really mean it. Sumo specifically didn't want this guy to have any candid animations, as in animations that play at the press of a button like most video game characters. Instead, everything he does, you have to tell him to do, and it's all handled through the game's physics engine. Noodle won't move forward just at the press of a button. Instead, you have to manually move him back and forth to make him slither across the ground. You really only control Noodle's head, and his body usually follows wherever you point him, although it does have a tendency to have a mind of its own. The controls in Snake Pass are a bit complicated due to how it handles movement, and they're one of the biggest hurdles to get over when playing the game. Every part of Noodle's body has its own weight to account for when moving around, so just because you get one part of his body where you want it doesn't mean the rest will easily follow. To help alleviate this, Noodle can call on assistance from his sidekick, who will lift his tail off the ground. That's if it's in a location the bird can actually reach. This, along with lifting Noodle's head upwards for vertical movement, or constricting Noodle's body to get some better grip, is all you have to work with. It's difficult to describe, but the way Noodle moves just seems to make sense. I have never been a snake, and don't have any plans to be one in the future, but the way Noodle traverses his environment looks like how an actual snake would traverse a similar environment. One of the loading screen tips says to think like a snake, and doing so is honestly helpful in visualizing how to get across many areas in the game. Controls never get more complicated than when they're introduced to you in level 1, but levels will put you against much more complex obstacles throughout the game's 15 levels. That may not sound like a whole lot of content, but it really is a fair amount. In order to repair the teleporter exit for every level, Noodle has to collect up to 3 different keystone gems spread throughout the environment. On the way, there are other things to collect, such as blue wisp orbs as well as golden coins, but they aren't required to finish the level and generally don't do much of anything. I've heard people describe Snake Pass as a modern character platform collectathon game, similar to those kind of games from the 90s and early 2000s, but I'd have to somewhat disagree. The game's mechanics are very different than basic platforming, since getting over a gap takes much more than just jumping over it. And while there are things to collect scattered all over the levels, keystones are the only thing that are ever needed. There's neither a store nor any unlockable levels that require players to go out of their way to grab coins or wisps. They seem to only exist for achievements and bragging rights, which is a bit of a shame. Instead, I describe Snake Pass as a game more like Octodad and Surgeon Simulator, since its complicated and non-straightforward controls fit those sorts of games a bit more. Just like those games, Snake Pass is a trial of patience and planning with a little bit of luck in order to make much in the way of progress. While I enjoyed how the game handles movement, I did find myself being fatigued by its control scheme throughout my playthrough, and would recommend multiple short play sessions instead of playing through the whole thing at once. Snake Pass is not an easy game. Since Noodle lives on floating islands, insta-kill death pits are abundant, along with spike pits and lava throughout the game's chapters. Spikes and lava are dependent on how you hit them for whether or not they will kill you. If only a little bit of Noodle's body is in a spike pit, he'll generally be fine, while the majority of his body being in one makes him a snake shish kebab. Lava pits work similarly, but will give players a second or two to get out of them before turning Noodle into instant ramen. The game takes place over 4 chapters, each one themed after a different element: earth, water, fire, and air. What hazards you come across will depend on what kind of element you're dealing with, but one thing throughout every environment will always stay the same: bamboo. It's useful to help guide players by being constant and showing where they can climb, but by the end of the game, it felt like levels were more made out of bamboo than anything else. Regardless, Snake Pass is a beautiful looking game. Sumo did a fantastic job creating a lush and lively world to move around in. There's foliage everywhere, with grass and small creatures reacting to Noodle's movement. The devs got just about everything they could have out of the Unreal 4 engine for this game, with some great lighting as well as art design. Even though the game lacks much in the way of voice acting and is light on in-game text, both Noodle and Doodle get across a lot of character with their expressions. That's not to say that everything is sunshine and rainbows, however, as there are a few issues with Snake Pass. The biggest one has got to be its camera. Since Noodle is so low to the ground, it can be difficult to get a good angle to see much at a distance, let alone things that are above you. Keystones will send out a beam of light above them to make them easier to find, but unless you can actually look up at the sky, it's not really all that helpful. The camera also suffers in tight spaces and will sometimes leave props such as leaves on the screen when going near a wall. I also had a problem when it came to trying to grasp just how long Noodle's body was, and many times it felt like he was getting longer throughout a level than he was when he started. That's not everything though, as the game does have some annoying checkpoints. Checkpoints are always a tricky business, but the way they're set up in Snake Pass are rather obnoxious. You see, collectibles don't save when they're collected. Instead, they're only saved to your file when you grab a checkpoint. Collectibles are scattered just about everywhere, with 20 wisp orbs and 5 coins per level. Wisps are generally easy to find and easy to get, but coins can be a real pain in the butt sometimes. Grabbing a hard-to-reach coin and dying before reaching a checkpoint means you'll have to grab that coin all over again. Snake Pass likes to chain its obstacles together, having players go through multiple ones to get where they want to go. Many times, I found myself having to traverse the same obstacles over and over again, trying to get back to an obstacle I hadn't figured out yet and would probably die on. Having to constantly redo the same areas isn't all that enjoyable, but I do kind of understand why it's set up this way. It could be easy to just fling yourself into the abyss, hoping to grab a coin or a wisp on the way down, and the checkpoint system means you have to actually think about getting to a collectible as well as back to safety. For the most part, though, it just made me have to constantly go back to a checkpoint every time I collected anything, for the fear of losing it and having to grab it again, since some of these things are just ridiculously difficult to grab. That being said, Snake Pass doesn't do much to restrict your movement. If you can figure out how to get through an area, then you can pretty much do it, even if that's not the way the developers intended. Overall, Snake Pass is a well-made game with some unique mechanics and lovely art design. I can't say I've ever played another game that's handled character movement the way it does. The game's soundtrack was also done by David Wise, who did a lot of music for the developer Rare back in the day, and his music here is great as well. It took me 6 hours or so to get through the game the first time, with only getting 100% of the collectibles in a couple of levels, and there is a time trial mode to unlock after finishing each chapter, complete with online leaderboards. I'm not much of a speedrunner to go back and do that, but the game ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, so it'll be interesting to see where Sumo takes it in the future. It's also at a good price of $19.99 US on Steam, and I definitely recommend the game to anyone looking for something different and challenging. That's all I got for now. Please let me know what you think about the game or this video in the comments section. I'm MegapieMan. I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more quick peeks? Click on the video on the left for Aklos Omega, a riot simulator set in ancient Greece. Or click on the video on the right for How to Shoot a Criminal, a modern FMV game similar to Her Story.